Anyway, so what is going on with Katie Cox? This is our first little segment. Katie Cox is a married mother of two out of Texas who recently was pregnant with what would have been her third child. She was very, very happy to have the child, was looking forward to it. And unfortunately, things did not work out too well for her. Her child that she was pregnant with was afflicted with a genetic disorder called trisomy 18, which is also known as Edwards syndrome. According to Wikipedia, this is caused by a third copy of the all or part of chromosome 18. So basically, it's a genetic disorder. It's kind of similar to Down syndrome or something like that. However, this one seems to not have a very good survival rate for the child. Although there are cases apparently where children have been known to live up until where they're toddlers. First off, quality of life is horrible. Secondly, they're most likely to die within hours or even minutes of being born. If they are even born alive to begin with, there's a very high number of stillbirths of children with this genetic disorder. And that can cause lots of complications too. When the child dies inside of the womb, it can endanger the mother's life. And anything from actual loss of reproductive capability, suddenly in order to keep you from basically dying, it results in sterility. Or you could actually die. That's a possibility with this. Anytime the fetus dies within the womb, that can endanger the life of a mother. So according to this, she went, Katie Cox, to her doctors. Her doctors recommended that she get an abortion. Now remember, Katie Cox really, really wanted to have this child, so this is devastating for somebody who was trying for a child to find out their baby isn't going to make it. But you do what you got to do, unfortunately. So the other problem, however, is that since Roe v. Wade has been overturned, Texas has enacted multiple abortion bans. There are 3 separate bans in Texas. Like, they couldn't just pass one law to ban it. They had to ban it 3 times. So there's like overlapping provisions in this law, right? That supposedly all 3 of these laws allow for this type of abortion to occur. If the mother's life is threatened or the pregnancy poses a serious risk of substantial impairment of a major bodily function. So her doctor argues, of course, that Katie Cox losing her fertility, permanently losing her ability to have children, kind of sounds like a serious risk of substantial impairment of a major bodily function, wouldn't you say? Kind of sounds like that falls under that provision. Unfortunately, they can't just give her an abortion because it's Texas, and these 3 laws are worded extremely vaguely. And they're worded vaguely on purpose, because that gives the people interpreting them much more leeway to deny people abortions. We'll come back to that in a minute. But essentially, she had to go to court to get a court order. Now imagine that. Imagine you go to your doctor recommends a medical procedure, and before you can do it, you have to actually go get a court order to do it. Imagine that, right? But that is exactly what Katie Cox did. She went to court. She had her doctor and herself, and they testified in front of a judge and said, we recommend that this happens, that this woman should be able to get an abortion according to the way the law is written, right? According to these provisions that say that you're supposed to be able to get one when your life is in danger. Now remember, all of the Republicans fall back on this whenever this question comes up. Oh, women need them because their life is in danger. Oh, well, in Texas, all of them say that the laws have provisions for that. They should be able to get abortions. That's what the law says, right? So remember, that's what they guaranteed us all this, right? All of the right-wing, conservative, Christian, Republican assholes said that this is how the law is supposed to work. And so Katie Cox gets this court order in order to get an abortion. And you would think everything would be fine, right? Everything would be cool. And that's not exactly what happened. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton kind of swooped in like the conservative asshole Christian Avenger and basically brought this case to the Supreme Court. And what he did is that he threatened her doctors, saying that if you perform this abortion, I'm going to prosecute you under the law, even though they had a court order to do it. That's the thing. They had a court order. They followed the law. They got this court order. They got themselves approved for this exception. And the Texas Attorney General said, in so many words, I don't care if you're following the law. I don't care if the judge and her doctor says you're allowed to do this. I'm going to throw you in jail anyway if you do it. That's basically what came from Ken Paxton. There's no love like Christian love, right, folks? So he appeals it to the Supreme Court of Texas, who then all side with Ken Paxton. Now remember, the Supreme Court of Texas, they're all basically conservative Christian Republicans. Right. And before we talk about their decision, we need to talk a little bit about the actual laws in Texas. So what are the actual laws in Texas that Katie Cox is had to navigate in order to basically get permission to get a life-saving medical treatment? These are the 3 laws, okay? So first one is a trigger ban that came into effect immediately after the Supreme Court got rid of Roe v. Wade. That just banned it immediately. According to that law, a doctor who performs an abortion can get a life sentence and a $100,000 fine. Now, just let that kind of sink in. A life sentence. You could go to jail for the rest of your life for performing a medical procedure that you are morally obligated to perform. See, doctors, just like lawyers, they take an oath. They take the Hippocratic oath that says, I shall do no harm. According to that oath, if you're laying there in the street dying, according to that, and a doctor sees you, that doctor is now obligated to do everything he can to save your life. That's what that oath means. You can lose your license, basically, if you're a doctor and you don't do everything you can to save someone's life. If you don't do everything within your knowledge and your power to give the best treatment at the time, you can lose your basically your license to practice medicine. And in fact, that happens all the time. When you sue your doctor for malpractice, and if it turns out that your doctor, like for example, was not giving the best treatment, had treatments available, didn't recommend them, stuff like that, they can lose their medical license. Just the same way that a lawyer can lose their ability to practice law, their law license or whatever, their bar license, I guess they call it. The same way a doctor can lose that, a lawyer can lose that if it turns out that they were purposely screwing you, or if they had like a conflict of interest, if they were really working for somebody else, that kind of thing. If they do something super unethical, they can lose their license. The doctor, the exact same fucking thing. So that doctor has to tell you, get an abortion. And if you really need that abortion or you're going to die, that doctor is supposed to give you the life-saving treatment and deal with the consequences later. Now, what does this law do? This law that says you'll get fined $100,000 and go to jail for the rest of your life, it scares doctors into not doing that. So what'll happen is that the doctor will refuse, and can you blame them? I mean, would you go to jail for the rest of your life just to give somebody a medical treatment? Would you take that risk? I mean, yes, I know that all of us on the outside say yes, but in real life, would you really take that risk? Like, most likely not. No. And you can't expect anybody to actually do that. And that's what the law is all about. That's why that law is written like that. It's written like that on purpose in order to scare people. So that's the first fucking thing. Second thing is that there is the bounty law in Texas. And this is that law that allows private citizens to sue people who get abortions. And you can be sued for up to $10,000. And I remember we talked about this in the streams when this happened a few years ago. This actually was before Roe v. Wade was overturned. It's basically a law that says anybody who gets an abortion, you can sue whoever helped them. And I think it actually allows you to sue the woman who gets the abortion. I'm not exactly sure. I guess I should have looked that up before the stream. I didn't. But I know that anyone who assists in them getting the abortion is open for a lawsuit. And the law is purposely worded extremely vaguely so that it's not just the doctor that performs the abortion. It can be the nurse who gives aid to that doctor. It can be the Uber driver that takes the woman to the clinic. It can be the doorman who opens the door at the clinic. It can be the hot dog vendor who sells her lunch afterwards. It could be anybody, right? Members of friends and family. Someone gives her a ride there, right? If she's living at somebody's house, like let's say you live with your boyfriend or something, conceivably they could sue him saying that he gave material help to you in order to help you get an abortion. Did he pay for it? Are you living at his house rent free? Shit like that. It's worded vaguely like that on purpose to allow essentially authoritarian asshole Christians to enforce their will on everybody else. That's what it's really all about. That's what that law is all about. Daring you to do it. Like that law was before Roe v. Wade, so it doesn't outlaw abortion, but it basically says that we'll punish anybody who gets one, and it's totally legal. It would be kind of like if there was a law in California, and I remember when this first came out, this is the comparison we made. It'd be like if there was a law in California that said anybody who buys a gun, we can sue them for $10,000. And not just the person who buys the gun, but the person who makes the gun, the person who sells the gun, the guy, the taxi driver that drove you to the store, right? It's ridiculous. It's the dumbest shit ever. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I think Texas actually tried to pass a law saying that people in other states, that you could sue them too in the state of Texas. Like if someone lives in Colorado and they get an abortion, then you could sue them in the state of Texas. And I think that law didn't pass because that's the most unconstitutional fucking thing ever. But just to kind of show you how crazy these people are, that is still the law in Texas. That passed in Texas. The Supreme Court decided not to strike that down. Right? Because you would think that is the most unconstitutional thing I've ever heard. Supreme Court said, nah, we don't care. We need to wait for a case to show up first before we can rule on it, is what the Supreme Court said, which is bullshit, because what the fuck is the Supreme Court there for if they're not going to do their goddamn job? But anyway, so that's still there until somebody gets sued, right? Until then, that law is still on the books. So Kate Cox, is now subject to that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But she's subject to it because she got an abortion. The third abortion ban is a ban that stretches all the way back to 1857, which could put doctors and healthcare providers in jail for 5 years. Now, I'm assuming that the trigger law supersedes that, but that law is now on the books. Ken Paxton and other Texas officials have insisted that as soon as Roe v. Wade was overturned, that law came back into effect. So there are 3 separate laws that ban abortion, not just one, but 3, that Katie Cox and other women seeking abortions have to contend with. And even when you actually navigate all of that labyrinthine legal landmines there, basically the Supreme Court and Ken Paxton can just jump right in and stop you anyway. Katie Cox then decided to go get an abortion outside of Texas. She left the state, got an abortion because if she didn't, she could die, or she could be rendered sterile, or any other kinds of things. And, she wants to have children. Remember, this woman actually wanted to have the child. In contrast to the stereotype that conservatives usually have of women who want to get abortions. Conservatives always say that, people just use abortions like birth control. That it's just women with loose morals. But that's the argument you always get from conservatives, right? That people are treating abortions like it's birth control, that they're just getting them left and right, whatever, and it's murder and all that, and it should be wrong, and blah, 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 blah. And unfortunately, in real life, that's bullshit. In real life, the average woman who gets an abortion is married and already has children and doesn't want more because they can't afford them. They were not planning on having another child, and they cannot afford a third or fourth or fifth child or whatever. That is the average woman who actually gets an abortion. And that holds true around the country, regardless of class or race or anything like that. I mean, yeah, most of them, they tend to be young. They tend to be under the age of 26. But they also tend to be married or in long-term relationships. They tend to be employed. They tend to already have children and just don't want more. So the concept that you get from the right wing that it's all loose, women getting 3, 4, 5 abortions or whatever, or like aborting their child if it's male or something like that. That's another bullshit thing that I've heard. Like, oh, the women will, if it's a boy, they'll just go and abort it because it's like feminists and shit, that kind of thing. That's bullshit. It's like, no, it's family planning is what it is, because people should have a right to plan their families. Long story short, she left the state. Katie Cox left the state, said fuck it, went to get an abortion because the Supreme Court ruled against her. The Supreme Court in Texas, ruled against her. And why did they rule against her? It was because the 3 abortion bans are worded extremely vaguely, which basically allowed them to interpret it however they wanted. And so they were able to come up with a very thin rationale in order to stop her from getting an abortion. So this is a quote from Time magazine that I want to read to you guys here. Let me just open the link. This is from Time magazine, and this is the part here. The Supreme Court, all 9 elected Republicans, mind you, heard the case and sided on Monday with Paxton, who said Cox's case didn't meet the medical exemption. They said the proper standard for allowing the termination of a pregnancy, then at 20 weeks, was enshrined in a law as a reasonable medical judgment. Cox's doctor, by contrast, said she held a good faith belief that Cox met the exception. The court, however, said the good faith belief was incompatible with the law standard of a reasonable medical judgment, and Cox faced a life-threatening condition. Of course, neither are defined in any of the states banned, giving hair-splitting Paxton a win because the doctor didn't use the magic words. The justices then entered Kafkaesque territory, implying that if an abortion was absolutely needed, it would have already been done, and asking the state medical board for guidance, advice, of course, that doesn't change the law's text. You see what happened there? You see what the Supreme Court in Texas said? The doctor used the wrong phrase. That's why. The doctor said she held a good faith belief that Cox met the exception. And the doctor didn't say reasonable medical judgment. If the doctor would have said reasonable medical judgment instead of good faith belief, would they have allowed her to get an abortion? Most likely not. Okay, because this is bullshit. You see what this is? It's hair-splitting bullshit that allows the authorities to just interpret the law any way they fucking want because it's written all weird and vaguely. I mean, you would think good faith belief means that you're using reasonable medical judgment, wouldn't you say? Wouldn't any normal, rational adult think that those two sentences are equivalent? That a doctor expressing a good faith belief means that they're also using their reasonable medical judgment. Wouldn't you say that? Of course you fucking would, because this is bullshit. Okay, then this part is really like the crazy shit right here. The justices then entered Kafkaesque territory, implying that if an abortion was actually needed, it would have already been done. See that? Saying that, oh, well, if she really needed one, you just would have done it, and then you would have come to us afterwards. So, never mind the fact that if you give this woman an abortion, you can go to jail for the rest of your life and be fined $100,000. So it's the end of your practice. All of your employees get fired. They all get laid off, and you go to jail for the rest of your life. Never mind all of that shit. You just would have done it anyway. You see what's happening here? It's written in such a way that they can basically just do whatever they want. And this is what you get whenever basically fascists are in charge. That's what this is. Fascists are in charge. This is how, look back at in the 1930s and 40s, Hitler and Mussolini and shit. And if you actually examine any of the court cases and laws and stuff in Germany and Italy, and this is exactly what they do. They apply the law however the hell they want in order to suppress the out group. And in this case, the outgroup are women who actually need to get abortions, who aren't 100% crazy conservative Christians willing to fucking, like, risk their lives in order to have a child. It's absolute fucking... It's infuriating bullshit. Because then Christians will still turn around and say, see, but there's provisions. We actually care about life, and we care about the life of the mother. The law says that you're allowed to get these abortions when you need them. But then when you actually fucking try, they do everything in their goddamn power to stop you. Right? Because it was never about the life of the mother. That's the thing to remember. I'll put this down in the link after the video publishes here. It was never about the life of the mother. It was never about quality of life or anything. It's never about protecting the little baby fetuses or whatever. It's not even about that. They don't even give a fuck about the child that's being aborted. They don't fucking care about that. It's about enforcing their will on everyone who isn't a Christian. It's about forcing everybody to live exactly the way that they want you to live, whether you like it or not, whether you're Christian or Catholic or whatever, whether that enforcing their religious beliefs upon you. That's what this is all about. That's what the abortion ban is all about. That's what all the anti-trans laws are all about. That's what taking the banning books because of they're supposedly pornographic or whatever from schools. That's what all of that shit's all about. That's what it's all been about, right? Is basically making Christianity the official state religion and forcing everyone to live by their ridiculous, stupid-ass, primitive fucking morals and ideals. And if you don't like it, then too bad for you. Texas is like ground zero for this shit when it comes to this stuff, because if they can force you to have a child, if they can then they can force you to do anything. If they could take away your bodily autonomy, like what does that mean when you take away someone's bodily autonomy, right? When it says you're not allowed to get this medical procedure, you're not allowed to do to do this with your body how you like. What does that mean? It means that if they can force you to do something with your body that you don't want to do, including forcing you to have a child, then they can force you to do anything. They can force the expression of religions, whether you like it or not, in instances where you have to attend, like your work or your school or something like that. They can force that on you, right? They can force what you say, what you're allowed to say, or what you're not allowed to say, how you're allowed to express yourself, who you're allowed to associate with. They can do all of that. If they can take away your bodily autonomy, there's no other thing that they can't extend that logic to. They're basically saying, we know better than you do about this, and you don't have a choice. How long before there's forced prayer in schools that your child has to go along with, whether they like it or not? You know what they'll say? Oh, well, you could just stay quiet in the corner. That's what they'll say. How long before there's fucking Trump rallies inside of a high school? All right. I'm serious. I'm absolutely fucking serious. How long before there's a picture of Donald Trump in every single fucking high school that children are forced to say the Pledge of Allegiance to every fucking morning? And then, if you don't do it, you get reported. How long before that shit happens? I mean, yeah, okay, is this a slippery slope? Yeah, it is. I fully admit that. But it's not like there aren't places on this earth where this is a daily occurrence, where these types of things do happen. I mean, if it can happen in North Korea, it can happen here. If Iran can codify religious texts into secular law, then it can happen here. And don't think that they're not trying to, because they are. This is a perfect fucking example of that. I mean, but Texas in general is just crazy. I mean, 3 different abortion bans. Let's just, let's step it back from all that. Okay, maybe it's not the apocalypse. Maybe it's not the end of the world. Maybe it's not this first step to a Christian fundamentalist hellhole, even though I think so. But let's just examine exactly, let's say, people who defend abortion bans and stuff like this, let's examine exactly what's going on there. Okay? You have a state where 3 different laws exist that punish people. So which one takes precedence? What, the one that punishes you the most? One law says that you go to jail for 5 years. Another law says you go to jail for the rest of your life. So how do you navigate those things? Which one do they choose to enforce if they contradict each other? I mean, how do you even know? Then don't forget the law that says you're allowed to sue people. I believe that Katie Cox is now vulnerable to that law, since she went and got an abortion in another state. I believe that means that she's now open to that somebody could, if they wanted to, try to sue her for $10,000. I mean, am I reading the law wrong? I don't think so. It doesn't say just getting an abortion in Texas. It says any woman who gets an abortion. I'm assuming that means also if you leave the state and go and get an abortion. So is she going to come back to Texas and find a lawsuit from the Alliance Defending Freedom Foundation or some shit like that? She very well could. I mean, this is all not a bug. Okay, this idea that everything's so vague like this and it's open to interpretation and that allows them to just fuck people up whenever they feel like it. It's not a bug. It's a feature. It's a feature of fascism. It's a feature of authoritarianism. And the same thing happens in Iran as well, and Saudi Arabia, when you have these religious laws that were written hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, applied into secular law. You know, they have two different court systems in Iran. You have the secular courts and then the religious courts. And so you commit a crime, and even if the secular courts say you're okay, then you have to navigate the fucking religious courts where it's like, oh, well, according to this passage in this book that was written fucking 1,500 years ago, you can get stoned to death for that, or whatever. But it's all weird and ambiguous because the language and has been translated 17 times and all this other shit. How is a normal person, a normal, ordinary person just living their life, how are they supposed to navigate all of this stuff when you inevitably get in trouble with legal problems, which most of us in our lifetime at one time or another will? You will get in trouble with legal problems at some point. You just will. You know, it just happens. It just happens to fucking everybody. So when that happens, how the fuck are you supposed to, like, get through all of this? Right? How are you supposed to navigate through all this? How are you supposed to... The whole point is that you're not. You're not supposed to be able to. You're not supposed to know anything about anything. And you're supposed to live your life in fear of what could happen to you if you go outside the norm. And that's the entire point of laws like this. It allows them to basically just control your life. And in this case, force you to live as a conservative evangelical Christian. Even if you don't believe, you're still forced to live like you are one, whether you like it or not. And if you don't, you go to jail, you get sued, whatever. That's what it is. That's Christian fundamentalism right there. Christian dominionism means they have dominion over you. And before you know it, you won't be able to vote if you're not Christian. You won't be able to own land if you're not Christian. You won't be able to get married if you're not Christian. Not just if you're, like, gay or something like that and you want to get married to... No, not just that. You won't even be able to get married if you're not a Christian. They'll outlaw marriages between Christians and non-Christians, and then they'll say non-Christians are not allowed to get married. I'm not even kidding. You know why? Because that's what it's like in fucking Iran. That's what it's like in Saudi Arabia. That's what it's like in Afghanistan. All right? They'll do the exact same shit here. Don't think they won't. That's the goal. The goal is to turn us into a Christian nation. And what does a Christian nation mean? It means exactly what they want it to mean. It doesn't even mean what the fucking Bible says. It'll mean whatever they want it to mean. That's why this shit is important. And it kind of really gets me that people have, like, forgotten about abortion. And it's like, oh, well, it's over with, fine. I mean, yeah, I know the voters haven't. Like, you know, Republicans and shit have been losing elections and stuff for the last 2 years, and thank God they have. Good. I'm glad it pissed people off. But how come we should be having... There should be fucking, like, abortion marches in the streets right now. Like, this news, why are there not people protesting this in Texas? What the fuck happened? What happened to the activism? Why aren't there, like, 10,000 people outside of Ken Paxton's fucking office right now? Like, protesting this shit, saying, you know, Katie Cox, all this was fucking done dirty. No one's gonna change it if it's not us, folks. Okay, that's the thing. The last thing I'm gonna end with here, right? If you want to see this kind of thing stop, If you want to see actual freedom again in Texas and elsewhere, then no one is going to do it for you. It has to be you. You're the one that has to do it. You have to be an activist. This is what being an activist is all about. You see injustice, you have to stand up against injustice. And no matter how many people you complain to on the internet, it's not going to change. No matter how many comments you make on TikTok or whatever, it's not going to change. The only way it changes is that if you get out there, you protest, and then when you ultimately vote. And when these assholes win the election again, when Ken Paxton and all these other morons who fucking caused all this shit get reelected in Texas because you didn't get out there and you didn't fucking vote them out, then you got nobody to fucking complain about. And in the meantime, the Katie Coxes of the world have to pay the price. Christians and authoritarians and conservative evangelical Republican assholes are horrible, but they're enabled by the inaction of their opposition. I don't know. That's how democracy works. We got to use democracy to actually help us. You know what I'm saying here, folks? Here's hoping that everything works out for Katie Cox there. You know, that's the very last thing that I'll end with, is that, you know, there's actual real life victims here when it comes to these things. This is a real person. You know, it's easy to hear just something about a case like this on Reddit or whatever and just dismiss it and be like, oh, that's just another person. Okay. Another person had to flee the country, blah, blah. Another 10-year-old girl had to, like, go to another state to get an abortion, whatever. Oh, it's tragic. It sucks. But, you know, these are real actual people with real actual lives. They need our help. They're not just pixels on a computer screen that will respawn if they, like, get run over by a car or something. You know, it's not a video game. These are not just rando NPCs that you can just forget. No, these are real fucking people. Real people with real lives that get ruined when the wrong people are allowed to take control and enforce their will on everyone. They need our help. And it couldn't happen to you or somebody you love. If you're not a woman yourself, it could happen to your mother or your sister or your wife. And you could very well find yourself in this position too one day. And that's why the shit's important. It's like it's not just the quality of their lives that we need to improve and fight for. It's the quality of our lives too. So get out there and do something about it, folks. Hello, folks. If you like what I do and you want to support the channel, please consider buying something from my Etsy shop, supporting me on Patreon, liking and subscribing, and checking me out across my social media links listed below. Thank you all so much, and see you next time.